When I pulled into the driveway of my father's old house in the Blue Ridge foothills after 7 months away, three things stopped me cold before I even cut the engine. The front porch light was on. I had disconnected the timer before leaving last spring. The flower beds along the walkway had been freshly weeded, and someone had replaced the broken step I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I sat in my truck for a long moment, engine ticking, staring at a house that was supposed to be empty. That's when I remembered the cameras. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, and what time is it there. I always love knowing who's with me when I share these stories. My father built that house himself in 1962, white clapboard and black shutters on 4 acres outside Staunton, Virginia. He died 9 years ago and left it to me, the oldest of 3. My brother lives in Phoenix and my sister in Portland, neither of them interested in keeping it. For 15 years it had been mine not to live in, but to maintain, to hold on to, the way you hold on to the last thing a person leaves behind. My wife Margaret and I used to drive down from Richmond on long weekends in the fall. She loved the way the fog settled in the hollow below the property each morning, patient and gray, like it was waiting for something. Margaret passed away 22 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. This was my first time back since her funeral. I'd asked my son-in-law to check on the property twice while I was dealing with everything in Richmond. He had a key. He knew the place. He'd said it was fine both times. Now, standing on the porch looking at a repaired step that I had not repaired, I wasn't so sure fine was the right word. I unlocked the front door. The air inside was wrong immediately, not the stale, sealed-up smell of a closed house in summer. It smelled lived in. A trace of coffee, something faintly like laundry detergent. The entry rug had been moved 2 inches from where Margaret always kept it. I knew because she had placed it precisely to cover a gouge in the hardwood left by a dropped cast-iron pan, and now the gouge was visible at the corner. I walked slowly through the living room, nothing dramatically out of place. But the small things were wrong in the way a room looks when someone has tried very hard to put everything back. A framed photograph of my parents on their wedding day had been replaced on the mantel, but slightly too far to the right. The blanket on my father's old chair was folded the wrong way. Margaret folded the corners under. These corners were folded over. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator out of habit. It was plugged in. I had unplugged it. Inside, a half-empty bottle of orange juice, a block of cheese, 2 bottles of sparkling water. Someone had been eating here, staying here. The realization moved through me slowly, the way cold water rises when you step into a creek. First your feet, then your ankles, then your whole body understanding at once. My daughter and my son-in-law. It had to be. She had been pulling away for almost a year. Short calls, vague answers, a brightness in her voice that sounded rehearsed. The last time I'd seen them in person was Christmas, and even then my son-in-law spent most of the visit on his phone, stepping outside twice to take calls he didn't explain. My daughter had watched him with eyes that didn't match her smile. I'd told myself it was work stress. I'd told myself it wasn't my business. Now I walked to the back of the house, to my father's workshop, a room he had built along the rear addition in 1978, where he kept his woodworking tools, and where I had spent some of the most important hours of my childhood. I opened the door and stood still. The workbench had been cleared. Not cleaned, cleared. Tools moved aside, the pegboard behind it rearranged. The floor in the corner near the old chest freezer showed faint scuff marks in the sawdust, a rectangular outline, like something heavy had been dragged and set down. The freezer itself, which I kept unplugged with the lid propped open, was now sealed shut. I opened it. Empty, but cold. Someone had been running it. I stood in that workshop for a long time. My wife's voice came to me, not a memory exactly, but the sensation of her voice. The particular way she had of saying things that sounded quiet but hit hard. You always wait too long to ask the difficult questions, Walter. Ask them before it costs more to wait. She had insisted on the cameras. I'd thought she was being cautious when we installed them 3 years ago, after teenagers had broken into the garage and taken 2 boxes of my father's hand tools. Margaret said people behave differently when they believe no one is watching. She had been right about most things. I sat down on my father's old stool and opened the app on my phone. My hands were steadier than I expected. I selected the workshop feed and scrolled back 7 months. For the first 2 months, Nothing. Empty room, afternoon light sliding across the workbench. Then in late February, the back door opened. My son-in-law came in first. I had not seen him look like that before. He had lost weight. His face was drawn tight around the eyes, and he moved with the jerky overcorrection of someone running on too little sleep. He carried 2 large black duffel bags and set them on the cleared workbench without turning on the overhead light. He kept looking toward the door. My daughter came in behind him 3 minutes later. She went immediately to the window that looked out on the backyard and stood there with both hands braced on the sill. She did not look at him. He did not speak to her. From one of the bags he removed a portable hard drive, then another, then a third, and a stack of folders bound with rubber bands. He lined them up on the workbench with a care that seemed practiced, like someone cataloging things they'd handled many times. Then he opened the chest freezer, removed the foam pad that lines the bottom, and placed everything inside beneath it. He replaced the pad, sealed the freezer, and plugged it in. My daughter had not moved from the window. He went to her and said something I couldn't hear. The camera had no audio. She didn't turn around. He put a hand on her shoulder. She stepped away from it and walked out of the room. He stood alone at the workbench for a moment, looking at nothing. Then he turned off the light and followed her. I sat on that stool for a long time after the footage ended. I watched them return 4 more times over the following months, always entering from the back, always checking the freezer, always leaving before dark. The last visit was 9 days ago. My daughter came alone. She stood at the freezer for a long time with her hand resting on the lid. Then she sat down on the floor of my father's workshop, back against the wall, knees drawn up, and put her face in her hands. I closed the app. My phone buzzed, my daughter calling. I let it ring once, steadied myself, and answered. "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad." Her voice was bright in that rehearsed way. "Just checking in. Marcus said he thought you might be heading down to Staunton." "I'm here now," I said. "I've been walking through the house. Pals." "Oh, good. How's everything looking?" Someone fixed the front step. Another pause, longer. "Oh, yeah. Marcus noticed it was rotted through last time he came. He took care of it. You know how he is." I said, "The flower beds were weeded too." "Dad, we wanted to make sure the place was taken care of. You've had such a hard year, and we didn't want you coming back to a mess." I walked to the workshop while she was talking and opened the door. I looked at the freezer. I said, "I'm standing in Dad's workshop." The silence that followed was different from the pauses before. This one had weight. I said, "I'm going to open the chest freezer." "Dad." Her voice changed completely. "Dad, please don't. Please. Please just close that room and go sit in the kitchen, and I'll explain everything, I swear. Just don't touch anything in there. I need to know what's in my father's house." I know you do. Just give me 20 minutes. Please, Dad." Her voice cracked. A sound in the background, a door, my son-in-law's voice saying something fast and low. She said, "I have to call you back." She hung up. I opened the freezer. I found them exactly where the footage showed. Beneath the foam pad, 3 external hard drives, a stack of folders rubber-banded in sets of 4, and a legal pad covered in my son-in-law's handwriting. I spread everything on the workbench and started reading. My son-in-law had spent 11 years as a senior data analyst at a pharmaceutical consulting firm that contracted with a company called Veriton Life Sciences. Veriton had been running a Phase 3 clinical trial for a cardiac drug called Corvalax. The trial results had been manipulated, adverse event reports deleted from the submission database. Patients who suffered serious cardiac episodes reclassified in the records as having withdrawn voluntarily. At least 9 deaths across 3 trial sites had been removed from the final safety data submitted to the FDA. He had the original records, all of them, the deleted files, the before and after database logs, internal emails from Veriton executives discussing the reclassifications, and a series of wire transfer records showing payments made to 3 trial coordinators in the months before submission. The legal pad contained his notes, dates, names, cross-references. At the bottom of the last page, he had written, "If anything happens to me, these files prove what they did. The drug is already in Phase 4 distribution. People are taking it now." I set the legal pad down. My phone rang. My daughter. She spoke before I could. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely follow the words. She told me that he had brought the evidence to his supervisor 8 months ago. The supervisor had told him to delete everything and forget it. He refused. 2 weeks later, he was terminated for what they called repeated performance deficiencies. He had never in 11 years received a negative performance review. He went to a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the files and told them the case was solid, but that Veritan had the resources to bury it for years in litigation. The lawyer said he needed to be careful about who he talked to and to make sure the originals were somewhere safe before doing anything else. 3 months ago, the lawyer died. Heart attack at 51. He coached his son's Little League team. He had been training for a marathon. I said, "Did you go to the FDA?" "We tried." She was crying now. We submitted an anonymous tip with a portion of the files, the ones Marcus had backed up online. Nothing happened. Then Marcus's work laptop was stolen out of our car in a parking garage. Our home network was compromised. Our IT friend found remote access software installed on our router. Someone had been in our systems. That's when they brought the originals here. I said, "How long have you been scared?" "A long time, Dad." She exhaled. "A long time." I said, "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I didn't want this to become your problem." Her voice broke on the last word. "You were grieving. You were just getting through the days. I couldn't bring this to you." I stood in my father's workshop holding 11 years of someone's documented courage in my hands and thought about my daughter making a decision alone, in the dark, trying to protect me from something she couldn't carry alone. I said, "I'm going to take care of this." "Dad, I'm going to take care of this. Give me a few hours." Headlights swept through the workshop window. I moved to look through the glass and saw a dark sedan pulling slowly onto the gravel drive. No headlights now, coasting. It stopped behind my truck. My daughter was still on the line. I said quietly, "Someone just pulled into the driveway." "Oh, God." "Dad," I said, "call Marcus. Tell him where I am. Then call 911 and give them this address." "Dad, please leave. Go out the back. I'm not leaving without these files. I'll call you back." I ended the call and stood very still. In 31 years as a high school principal, I had learned something about dangerous situations. Most people who want to intimidate you are betting that you'll panic. Panic makes you stupid. Panic makes you run into corners. What my father had always told me, and what I had come to understand slowly over 6 decades, was that the person who stays calm longest usually wins. I moved to the workbench and repacked the files into the duffel bags as quickly as I could. Both bags. Everything. I slung them over my shoulders. They were heavy 20 pounds, maybe more. My lower back registered its objection. The back door of the workshop opened, not with force. Slowly, the way someone opens a door when they want to appear reasonable. He was my son-in-law's age, maybe 40, wearing a dark jacket, hair neat. He had the smooth presentation of someone who spent their days in conference rooms. He smiled at me. "Mr. Hollis, you found what you were looking for." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He stepped into the room. "Let's not do this the hard way. Marcus has been very foolish, and your daughter has been caught up in something she didn't understand. Whatever's in those bags doesn't have to destroy anyone's life. It can just disappear." I said, "Including the 9 people who died in the trial?" His smile didn't change, but something in his eyes went flat. He said, "Those individuals made an informed decision to participate." I said, "Their families might see it differently." He took another step. "The bags, Mr. Hollis." Here is what I did not tell him. When I packed up Margaret's car after her funeral, I found in the glove compartment a can of pepper spray she had kept there for 20 years. I had transferred it to my own glove compartment without thinking much about it. When I had walked back through the house before coming to the workshop, I had stopped at the entry table and put it in my jacket pocket. I took it out. He stopped moving. I said, "I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years managing buildings full of other people's children, which means I have had this exact conversation where someone thinks they can use calm intimidation to get what they want from me approximately 400 times. It never works." He said, "You're making a serious mistake." I heard gravel crunching outside, more than 1 set of feet. I said, "I think you should leave." He didn't move. I took 2 steps toward the back door, watching him, and pushed it open with my shoulder. Cold air hit my face. I went down the back steps and kept moving toward the tree line, both bags bouncing against my back. Behind me, voices. 2 more men had come around the side of the house. I heard the first man saying something, and then I stopped hearing words because I was moving faster than I had moved in years. Through the yard and into the dark edge of the woods, branches pulling at the duffel bags, the ground uneven and soft from recent rain. My father had walked these woods with me every Sunday morning for 18 years. I knew where the deer path cut through to the old fence line, where the fence line met the county road. I knew it the way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. My lungs were burning. My back was screaming. I did not stop. I heard them behind me, crashing through brush, not as careful as I was, not knowing the terrain. I reached the fence line and went through the gap my father had left in it decades ago, the one he used for walking to the neighbor's property, the one I had never had fixed because some part of me always knew there might be a reason to need it. The county road was 20 yards ahead. A porch light was on at the Morrison house across the road. I came out of the tree line onto the road shoulder at the same moment that a car appeared from the north, slowing as its headlights found me. It was a county sheriff's cruiser. The deputy got out with his hand on his belt. "Sir, are you Walter Hollis?" I said yes. "We got a 911 call. Your daughter. She said you needed help." I held up the bags and said, "I need these secured. There are men in the woods behind this property, and I need to make a phone call to a federal whistleblower attorney I have already looked up on my phone." He stared at me for a moment. Then he spoke into his radio. They searched the property for 2 hours. They found no one. The sedan was gone from the driveway. The only evidence of entry was the scuff marks in the workshop floor and a partial footprint in the mud at the back door. I sat in the back of the deputy's cruiser and called the whistleblower attorney, whose name I had found 3 weeks earlier, during a long, sleepless night in Richmond when I had begun to piece together that something was seriously wrong with my daughter's silences. I had written the number in the small notebook I kept in my jacket pocket. Margaret had given me that habit, carry a notebook, she'd said, because the things worth writing down always happen when you don't expect them. The attorney answered on the 3rd ring. By morning, a different kind of car was in my driveway. 2 agents from the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations arrived at 7:30, followed by an attorney from the Department of Justice. They worked in my father's kitchen, not the workshop, going through the files with a methodical patience that reminded me of the best teachers I had ever hired. The lead agent, a woman in her late 40s, had gray threaded into her hair, and the kind of focused quiet that I associated with people who had seen a great deal. She told me they had been building an investigation into Veriton for 14 months. They had suspected data manipulation in the Corvalax trial, but had been unable to obtain original database records because those records had been deleted from Veriton's servers. My son-in-law's files were the originals. She said, "Your son-in-law documented over 1,000 deleted adverse event entries. He preserved the deletion logs with timestamps and user IDs. He saved emails discussing the reclassification strategy. This is the kind of evidence that ends careers and changes policy." I said, "And 9 people who died." She looked at me steadily. "Yes. And gives their families answers." Then she opened a folder on her laptop and turned it toward me, and I felt the floor shift under me the way it does when something you feared turns out to be true. My son-in-law had not been entirely forthcoming with my daughter about his plans for the evidence. There were emails 18 months old, before everything had gone wrong between him and a journalist at a national publication, discussing an exclusive story in exchange for $10,000 in anonymity guarantees. He had also made contact with a rival pharmaceutical firm, offering the data as a competitive intelligence asset. Initial price discussed, $400,000. He had been playing multiple hands. I sat with that for a long time. The agent said gently, "We don't believe your daughter knew about any of this." I said, "She didn't. I knew it the way you know certain things about the people you have raised." My daughter had her mother's honesty, sometimes uncomfortable, never calculating. She did not have the capacity for that kind of maneuvering. What she had was a stubborn loyalty to the people she loved, even when they didn't deserve it. She arrived at the house at noon with my son-in-law. Both of them brought in separate cars. I saw her through the window before she came in. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She looked like she was bracing for something. She came through the door and stopped when she saw me at the kitchen table, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she crossed the room and I stood up and she put her head against my shoulder and cried in the way she used to cry when she was 8 years old and something had gone badly wrong in a way she didn't know how to fix. I held her and didn't say anything about anything for a while. My son-in-law was interviewed in the living room for 3 hours. My daughter was interviewed in the workshop. I waited in the kitchen and drank bad coffee and thought about my father, who had built this house with his own hands, and my wife, who had loved the fog in the hollow, and the step on the front porch that my son-in-law had fixed when he was hiding here with my daughter's fear and his own complicated plans. The lead agent came back to the kitchen in the late afternoon. She sat across from me and was quiet for a moment, collecting her thoughts. She said, "Your son-in-law is being offered a cooperation agreement. His documentation is extraordinary, and his testimony will be essential. The unauthorized monetization discussions are a problem, but given the public health significance of what he uncovered, the U.S. Attorney is prepared to recommend limited immunity in exchange for full cooperation." I said, "And my daughter?" The agent said, "Your daughter has no exposure. She was not aware of the sale discussions. She stored files on a property with her father-in-law's her father's knowledge. There's nothing chargeable there." I felt something release in my chest that had been tight for so long I had almost forgotten it was there. The agent said, "There is one more thing." She opened her folder. Inside was a handwritten letter on plain notebook paper. She set it on the table and pushed it toward me. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my daughter's, the tall, looping letters she had used since middle school. The way she made her capital D with a small loop at the top that no penmanship teacher had ever been able to break her of. The letter was addressed to me. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever need to read this. I hope you don't. I hid this in the freezer with the files because if anything ever happened and someone found them, I wanted you to understand. Marcus found out about the deaths in November 2 years ago. He came home that night and sat at the kitchen table and didn't move for an hour. I had never seen him like that. He said he had been looking at data all day that had been altered, and he knew what it meant, and he didn't know what to do. We talked until 3 in the morning. He was scared. I was scared. We went to his supervisor and it went nowhere. We went to a lawyer and then the lawyer was gone. We moved the files because we thought it was the safest place, your house, where no one would look, where you weren't living. I didn't want to involve you. I thought I was protecting you. What I didn't know, what I should have asked more questions about, was what Marcus was doing on his own, in the months when I thought he was just trying to figure out how to go to the authorities safely. I found out about the emails to the journalist and the other company 3 weeks ago. He said he had panicked. He said he thought no one would believe us without some kind of external pressure. I believe him that he panicked. I don't fully excuse it. I should have come to you in November 2 years ago. The night Marcus sat at that table, I should have picked up the phone and called you and said, "Dad, something is very wrong and I need help." You would have known what to do. You always know what to do, even when you act like you don't. I'm sorry for the silence. I'm sorry for protecting you in the wrong direction. You deserved the chance to help. I should have given it to you. I love you. Tell the grandkids I love them. I'll see you on the other side of this, however it ends. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in my jacket pocket, next to the notebook Margaret had given me. The investigation moved quickly after that. Veriton's executives were indicted 8 months later, 14 counts between 3 individuals, including fraud, obstruction, and negligent homicide under federal pharmaceutical law. The Corvalak's distribution was halted within 48 hours of the evidence being handed over. 2 of the trial coordinators who had accepted payments cooperated with the government and received reduced sentences. The man who had come to my workshop, I learned later he was a former private investigator retained by Veriton's general counsel, was charged with witness tampering and conspiracy. My son-in-law testified for 6 days. It was not a dignified process. The sale discussions were entered into evidence, and the coverage was not kind. He accepted it. He sat in that witness chair and told the truth as completely as he knew how, and whatever his earlier calculations had been, he did not flinch from the accounting. My daughter sat behind him in the gallery every day of his testimony. She had been through something that would take years to fully understand, and the marriage would take work that I wasn't sure either of them yet knew how to do. But she was there. She sat behind him with her hands in her lap, and she was there. The 9 families whose loved ones had died in that trial attended the sentencing. I sat in the gallery and watched them listen to the judge. And I thought about what it means to have your grief given a name and a cause, to have the confusion that comes with sudden loss replaced by something legible, even if legible doesn't mean smaller. It doesn't fix anything, but it changes the shape of it. I drove back to Staunton the weekend after the sentencing. I wanted to see the house. I walked through every room, the entry with its moved rug, the kitchen with its unplugged refrigerator plugged back in, the workshop with its cleared workbench. I fixed the small things that were wrong, moved the photograph on the mantel back 2 inches, refolded the blanket on my father's chair the way Margaret had taught me, corners under. I sat on the back steps in the late afternoon and watched the light go out of the sky over the woods. Somewhere down in the hollow, fog was beginning to settle, patient and gray, waiting. I thought about what my wife used to say when I stayed too long inside a problem, going in circles, not asking the question that needed asking. She would come and sit beside me, not say anything at first, just sit, and eventually she would put her hand on my arm and say, "Walter, the thing you're afraid to ask is almost never as bad as the silence around it." She was usually right. My daughter called that evening while I was sitting on the porch. I answered on the first ring. "How are you, sweetheart?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I keep thinking about how long I waited. I know. I should have come to you before any of it happened. Before the files, before the lawyer, before all of it. The first night Marcus came home and sat at the table and didn't move. I should have called you that night. I said, 'You were trying to protect me.' She said, 'You didn't need protecting. I needed help.' Those are different things, and I got them confused. I sat with that. Outside, the last light was leaving the ridge. I said, 'Next time, if there's ever a next time, call me at the beginning.' She said, 'I will.' I said, 'I mean it. Middle of the night, any kind of trouble, call first, ask later. That's the whole arrangement. That's all I want.' She said, 'Okay, Dad.' We talked for another hour. About ordinary things, my grandchildren's school projects, a trip they were planning, a dog they were considering getting. Normal life, reasserting itself in the way it always does, filling in the space around the difficult things until the shape of them changes. After I hung up, I stayed on the porch a while longer. The fog had come all the way up from the hollow and was sitting just below the tree line, soft and still. A few stars were appearing. My hip ached from the cold. My hands were spotted the way my father's hands had been by the time he was my age, and his father's before that. I thought about what it means to be 64. Not old, not by the count that matters, but marked by time in the way that only time can mark a person, carrying people who are gone, carrying the things they taught you, carrying the weight of decisions made and unmade across decades. I had walked into that workshop carrying my grief and my wife's voice and 31 years of knowing how to stay calm when things go wrong. I had not had strength or speed or any of the things that the men who came for those files expected to encounter. I had patience and knowledge of the ground under my feet, and a notebook in my pocket, and a number I had written down 3 weeks before I needed it. That had been enough. Not every danger requires force. Some of them require a person who has been paying attention long enough to know what questions to ask and when to ask them. I went inside, locked the door, and banked the fire before bed. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, white hair, deep lines around the eyes, the posture of a man who has been carrying weight for a long time. I looked exactly like my father at this age. I didn't mind. I climbed the stairs, feeling every step in my joints, and got into bed in the room where I had slept as a boy, under the same roof my father had raised, in the same dark that the same stars had always filled. I slept without dreaming, deeply, and without fear, and that was more than enough. If any of this feels familiar to you, a son or daughter going quiet, pulling away, carrying something alone they shouldn't have to, don't wait for them to come to you. Go toward them. Ask the uncomfortable question. Be the person they can call at the beginning, before the silence hardens into something that costs more to break. That's what I would tell anyone now. Not a lesson I wanted to learn this way, but a lesson I'm grateful to know. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to VT Sweet Revenge for more stories like this one.